March 24, 1944, 10:47 p.m. Stalag Luft III, 100 miles southeast of Berlin. British bomber pilot Johnny Bull lies flat on a wooden trolley 30 feet underground. The tunnel is 2 feet wide. His shoulders scrape the walls on both sides. Above him, 600 pounds of sand held back by stolen bedboards. One collapse and he's buried alive. Nobody's coming to dig him out. The rope jerks. Bull starts moving. The trolley rattles along wooden rails, pulled by men he can't see toward freedom he's not sure exists. The air is thin down here, stale. The string of light bulbs powered by stolen electricity flickers once, twice. Bull's heart stops. If those lights go out, he's crawling blind through a coffin. 336 feet. That's how far he has to travel. 336 feet of sand and darkness, and wooden boards, and hope. At the other end, theoretically, is a hole in the frozen ground outside the camp's perimeter fence. At the other end is the forest. At the other end is a chance. The trolley stops. Bull's turn to climb. The exit shaft rises vertically above him. 30 feet of ladder rungs nailed to wooden supports. He starts climbing. His civilian clothes, sewn from stolen blankets and dyed with boot polish, catch on the rough wood. His forged identity papers press against his chest. If the Germans find those papers, if they realize what's happening, every man in this tunnel dies. Bull reaches the top, pushes through the thin crust of snow. Cold air hits his face like a fist. He gulps it down, fills his lungs with freedom for the first time in years. Then he looks around, and his stomach drops. The tunnel is short, 20 feet short. The exit hole sits in open ground, completely exposed. The forest that was supposed to provide cover is a 60-foot sprint away, and between Bull and those trees, German guards patrol with rifles and dogs. The plan called for 200 men to escape tonight. 200 Allied airmen flooding out of this tunnel into the darkness, scattering across Nazi Germany, overwhelming the search parties through sheer numbers. Now Bull realizes the truth. They're not going to get 200 men out. They might not get 20. Every single man who climbs out of this hole has to wait for a signal, has to sprint across open ground, has to pray the guards don't look in the right direction at the wrong moment. Johnny Bull pulls himself out of the hole and runs. Behind him, 75 more men will follow before dawn. Only 3 of them will ever taste freedom again. The rest will be hunted down. 50 of them will be murdered by the Gestapo on Adolf Hitler's personal orders. This is the story of the Great Escape, the most audacious prison break of World War II. The night 76 men crawled through 336 feet of tunnel, dug with spoons and tin cans, shored up with bedboards and blankets, powered by stolen electricity and pure defiance. Hitler said Stalag Luft III was escape-proof. He was wrong. Stalag Luft III wasn't just another POW camp. It was the Nazi answer to a problem that had been embarrassing them since 1940. Allied airmen kept escaping. Shot down pilots and bombardiers and navigators, men trained to think creatively, to solve problems under pressure, to never give up. The Germans captured them, locked them up, and watched them tunnel out, climb out, bluff their way out. Over and over. So in 1942, the Luftwaffe built Stalag Luft III specifically to hold the escape artists, the troublemakers, the men who'd already broken out of other camps and been recaptured. They picked a location 100 miles southeast of Berlin, in Lower Silesia, surrounded by pine forests that seemed to offer cover, but actually made escapees easier to track. They designed every feature of the camp to make tunneling impossible. The prisoner barracks were raised off the ground on stilts. Guards could see underneath, could spot any digging before it started. The camp sat on bright yellow sand that would be impossible to conceal. Any prisoner who dug would be covered in golden dust. Obvious. Caught. The Germans buried seismograph microphones 9 feet underground along the entire perimeter fence. Sensitive equipment that could detect digging from hundreds of feet away. They planted informers among the prisoners, they conducted random searches at all hours, and for good measure, they built the fences 100 feet from the nearest tree cover. Any tunnel would have to stretch more than 300 feet just to reach the forest. 300 feet through sandy soil that collapsed without constant reinforcement. 300 feet without proper tools, without materials, without detection. The Germans were proud of Stalag Luft III, escape-proof they called it, a model facility. They didn't account for Roger Bushell. Squadron leader. Roger Bushell was 33 years old when he arrived at Stalag Luft III in 1942. South African-born, British-raised, Cambridge-educated, a champion skier, a brilliant lawyer, a Royal Air Force pilot shot down over France during the evacuation of Dunkirk. He'd already escaped twice from other camps. The Germans caught him both times. They warned him that a third attempt would mean death. Bushell didn't care. He looked at Stalag Luft III and saw what the Germans saw. An escape-proof camp, microphones in the ground, guards everywhere, yellow sand that betrayed every digger, a 300-foot killing zone between the barracks and the trees. Then he looked again and saw something else. 600 men with nothing but time. Pilots and navigators, trained in engineering and problem-solving. Officers who refused to accept captivity, and guards who could be bribed with chocolate and coffee. Bushell called a secret meeting in the spring of 1943. The men who gathered were the best escape artists in the camp, the schemers, the builders, the forgers, the ones who'd tried before and failed and were ready to try again. Bushell's plan was insane. They weren't going to dig one tunnel. They were going to dig 3. Simultaneously. If the Germans found one, the others would continue. If they found 2, the third would still break them free. He named the tunnels Tom, Dick, and Harry. Each tunnel would start from a different barracks. Each would stretch more than 300 feet to reach the forest. Each would be dug 30 feet deep to avoid the microphones. Each would require thousands of man-hours of labor, hundreds of pounds of stolen materials, and absolute secrecy from 600 prisoners living in close quarters with German informers. The men in that room looked at Bushell like he was crazy. Then they started planning. The logistics of digging 3 tunnels without detection should have been impossible. The Germans had thought of everything. But Bushell's men thought harder. The entrance to Harry, the tunnel that would eventually succeed, was hidden beneath a heating stove in Hut 104. The stove was always lit, always hot. German guards never looked underneath, because getting close meant getting burned. The prisoners built a trapdoor into the concrete foundation, disguised so perfectly that even knowing it was there, you couldn't find it. Below the trapdoor, they dug straight down, 30 feet, deep enough to be below the German microphones, deep enough that the seismographs couldn't detect the scraping of their tools. It took weeks just to dig the entrance shaft. The tools they used were pathetic: spoons stolen from the mess hall, tin cans from Red Cross packages, the edges sharpened into cutting surfaces. They had no shovels, no picks, no proper equipment, just desperation and ingenuity. The sand they removed was golden yellow, bright as a warning sign. If the Germans saw that sand anywhere in the camp, the game was over. So the prisoners invented a disposal system that bordered on genius. They sewed long cloth bags that hung inside their trousers, connected to strings that ran up to their pockets. A prisoner would fill his bags with sand below ground, climb out of the tunnel, and walk casually across the camp. When he reached the vegetable gardens that prisoners were allowed to tend, he'd pull the strings. The bags would open. Yellow sand would spill into the dark soil. He'd rake it in with his feet while pretending to work the garden. They moved over 100 tons of sand this way, bag by bag, handful by handful, right under German noses. The tunnel walls kept collapsing. Sandy soil doesn't hold its shape. Every few feet, the ceiling would cave in, burying whoever was digging. The prisoners needed shoring. wood to brace the walls and roof. They stripped 4,000 bedboards from the barracks. The bunks sagged. The Germans noticed, inspected, found nothing. The prisoners had hidden the boards too well. They needed light. Working in absolute darkness was impossible. So they stole electrical wire, tapped into the camp's power supply, and strung a line of light bulbs through all 336 feet of the tunnel. When the guards walked overhead, the lights flickered. The diggers learned to freeze when that happened, to hold their breath until the flickering stopped. They needed air. 30 feet underground, 336 feet from the entrance, the oxygen ran out fast. Men passed out at the digging face, had to be dragged back unconscious, so the prisoners built a pump, a bellows system constructed from kit bags and hockey sticks and ping-pong paddles. They ran air ducts, made from powdered milk tins, over 1,000 of them, soldered together with fat skimmed from the watery soup the Germans served. They needed documents. Every escapee would need identity papers to travel through Nazi Germany. The prisoners set up a forgery operation that would have impressed professionals. They bribed guards with chocolate and coffee to obtain sample documents. Artists hand-copied them. They carved travel stamps into the heels of boots and used shoe polish as ink. They produced over 400 forged identity cards, travel passes and work permits. They needed civilian clothes. The prisoners took their uniforms apart, re-dyed the fabric with boot polish, and crushed flower petals, and sewed them back together as suits and overcoats. They made buttons from scrap metal. They fashioned ties from strips of blanket. 600 men worked on this operation for nearly a year. Diggers, engineers, forgers, tailors, lookouts. They developed an elaborate warning system. A prisoner reading a book near a window would turn a page when a guard approached. Another would tie his shoelace. The signals passed through the camp faster than the guards could walk. The Germans found Tom in September 1943. They were proud of themselves, brought in photographers to document their discovery, demolished the tunnel with satisfaction. They never knew about Dick and Harry. Dick became a storage facility for sand and equipment. Harry kept growing, foot by foot, 300 feet, 320 feet, 336 feet. By March 1944, it was done. The escape was scheduled for March 24th, a moonless night, freezing cold, perfect darkness for 200 men to slip out of a Nazi prison camp and scatter across Germany. Bushell organized the order of escape with cold logic. First priority went to the men with the best language skills and the most realistic chance of actually making it home. German speakers, men who could pass as foreign workers. Then came the prisoners who'd worked hardest on the tunnel construction. The rest would be chosen by lottery. At 10:30 p.m., the trapdoor under the stove opened. The first man descended into the darkness. Everything went wrong immediately. Johnny Bull emerged from the exit shaft and discovered the tunnel was short, 20 feet short of the tree line. The entrance to freedom sat in open ground, visible to any guard who happened to look in the right direction. They improvised. A rope system. Men hiding in the forest would tug when it was safe to exit. One tug meant wait. 2 tugs meant run. The escapees had to sprint 60 feet across open snow while praying the guards didn't see them. The process was agonizingly slow. Instead of 1 man every 2 minutes, they were getting maybe 8 men out per hour. At this rate, they'd never get 200 through before dawn. Then the tunnel partially collapsed. Then an air raid caused a blackout. The lights went out for an hour. Men were trapped underground in absolute darkness, unable to move forward or back. The clock kept ticking. Dawn was coming. The guards changed shifts at 5 a.m. If anyone noticed empty bunks, if anyone did a head count, if anyone happened to look toward the forest at the wrong moment. At 4:55 a.m., a German soldier on routine patrol walked past the exit hole. His foot broke through the thin crust of snow. He looked down and saw the shaft. Alarms. Sirens. searchlights sweeping the compound, guards with dogs converging on the forest. 76 men had made it through the tunnel. The 77th was halfway out when the soldier's foot came down. He scrambled back underground. The prisoners in Hut 104 burned their forged documents, destroyed their escape equipment, prepared for the interrogations they knew were coming. Outside the wire, 76 men were running for their lives. Hitler received the news the next morning. His reaction was volcanic. 76 prisoners had escaped from his escape-proof camp. Allied airmen were loose in the Reich. The humiliation was intolerable. The Nazis mobilized the largest manhunt in German history. 70,000 soldiers, police, and Gestapo agents. Roadblocks on every highway. Patrols at every train station. Searches of every hotel, every farm, every building within 100 miles of the camp. The recaptures began within hours. Most of the escapees had no realistic plan beyond getting out of the tunnel. They were captured at train stations, on country roads, hiding in barns. Within 2 weeks, 73 of the 76 had been recaptured. 3 made it. 2 Norwegian pilots, Per Bergsland and Jens Müller, reached the Baltic coast and stowed away on a Swedish freighter. Neutral territory, safety, freedom. A Dutch pilot, Bram van der Stok, travelled by train across Germany, through France, across the Pyrenees into Spain, and eventually reached Gibraltar. He rejoined his unit and kept fighting. 3 men out of 76. 3 men out of 200 who were supposed to escape. 3 men out of 600 who spent a year digging through sand with spoons. The other 73 were brought before Hitler himself for judgment. Standard procedure under the Geneva Convention was simple. Escaped prisoners who were recaptured were supposed to receive 10 days in solitary confinement. That was it. A slap on the wrist. Then back to the camp. Hitler had other plans. He ordered 50 of the recaptured escapees executed, not tried, not imprisoned, murdered, shot while attempting escape, the official reports would say, the biggest lie of all. Gestapo agents drove the prisoners, 2 or 3 at a time, to remote locations across Germany and occupied territory. They told them to get out of the cars to relieve themselves. Then they shot them in the back. Roger Bushell was among the 50. So was Johnny Bull, the first man through the tunnel. So were dozens of others who'd spent a year digging through sand, forging documents, sewing clothes, building an underground railway 30 feet below Nazi boots. Their ashes were returned to Stalag Luft III in urns, a message from Hitler to every other POW in German captivity. This is what happens when you defy us. It didn't work. After the war, British investigators hunted down the Gestapo killers. It took years. The murderers had scattered, changed names, gone into hiding. But the British didn't forget. They found them one by one. In 1947, a military tribunal convicted 18 Nazis for the murder of the 50 escapees. War crimes, violations of the Geneva Convention. 13 were hanged. The Great Escape became legend. The 1963 film made it famous, though Hollywood took liberties with the truth. There was no Steve McQueen on a motorcycle. No Americans in the tunnel, actually. The real story didn't need embellishment. 76 men crawled through 336 feet of darkness, dug with spoons and tin cans. They moved 100 tons of sand in bags hidden in their pants. They forged 400 sets of identity documents using boot heels and shoe polish. They built an underground railway with stations named after London landmarks. They tapped into the camp's electrical system to light their way. They pumped air through ducts made from powdered milk cans. They did all of this under the noses of German guards, German microphones, German informers. They did it for a year without being detected. And on one frozen night in March 1944, they proved Adolf Hitler wrong. The camp wasn't escape-proof. Nothing is escape-proof when 600 men refused to accept captivity. 50 of them paid with their lives. Their names are carved on a memorial at the site of Stalag Luft III. The woods have grown over the tunnel exits. The barracks are gone. But the memorial remains. Roger Bushell, Johnny Bull, 48 others who ran toward freedom and found bullets instead. They knew the risks. They dug anyway. They climbed out of that hole knowing they might die and ran toward the trees because the alternative was accepting that they were beaten. Hitler called his camp escape-proof. 76 men with spoons proved him wrong.